Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. I'm Ella Sagar. I'm a reporter on the Media Leader. I'm going to be your chair for today. We have 15 minutes for our discussion. We have a lot to get through. So today we're going to be talking about how Hilton Worldwide, with the help of Merkle, approached media planning over the last 2 years to mark themselves out in a crowded category. I'm delighted to introduce our panel. So I have Surinder, Phuller. She's Senior Director of Digital Media, Social and Insights at Hilton Worldwide. And I've also got Charlotte Crook with me, Managing Partner for Strategy and Planning at Merkle. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
So to start off, my first question is for you, Surinder. Can you provide me with some context? What was the business challenge that Hilton were experiencing that you needed to address through media?
So I think the biggest challenge we've ever had, surprise, surprise, is obviously COVID, which pretty much decimated travel, bar key worker travel globally. And what that meant from a media perspective is that we had our opportunities to drive revenue were vastly different, and I'm talking about even as recent as last year. Our goals were different. So last year, pretty much every marketing or every team within marketing was just, probably every team within the company, just there to drive business recovery. But because those opportunities were different, we needed to think about how do we show up differently to drive more revenue. So, and I'll give you an example, our smallest region in Europe, Middle East and Africa became our largest revenue region last year, purely because of lack of travel restrictions in said region and greater confidence to travel. So one example of how we showed up differently is we noticed that whenever there was a lockdown restriction easing, there was a spike in demand and booking for 10 days after the announcement, of which 70%-ish of bookings happened 3 days prior to like a Bojo announcement or an Angela Merkel announcement or whichever. And that trend was consistent for every single market in Europe, Middle East and Africa. So what we did is we started to look at our internal markers, so occupancy, demand, business on the books, but also external markers like travel, where are the flight paths, who's got which inventory, who's got which flight sales. And crucially, we shared this data with Merkle, we had conversations, and we decided to ramp up our visibility during those 10 days for every single lockdown. And I can tell you the net impact of that, and we did several last year, is we drove just over $6 million worth of revenue just for those spikes at a return on ad spend of 8-1, so very, very efficient. And for some of those lockdown announcements, I'm thinking about the UK one that Bojo did, I want to say in January, saying we were coming out in May. We had the combined share of voice of our 3 biggest competitors, which, coming back to that courage, I think sort of told us that we were first to market with a really different approach. Obviously now, hopefully we're not going back into lockdown, and that strategy will no longer work. So we've spent a long time this year with Merkle thinking about how do we automate that decision process, what markers should we look at, and how do we use predictive modelling to just make it a lot more smoother and quicker, essentially.
That's really interesting. And now for Charlotte, so obviously Merkle has a specific approach to media. What were your priorities when working with Hilton, and how did you approach this particular kind of brief?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having us on the panel. I think for us at Merkle, we're very fortunate in that Hilton are hugely collaborative, and Surinder's already mentioned a number of examples of the data points that she was able to share with us and the team. I think ultimately the courageous decision making comes from having confidence in the data, but the challenge for us really around COVID was the huge amount of volatility and Merkle trying to be aligned with Merkel's announcements. So making sure that we're really thinking about how we surface the right data within those scenarios and those situations. So Surinder obviously mentioned that the business data was a really important component for informing our media strategies, and really for our media teams it's about making sure that they can pull through that business data into the media campaigns and the platforms that they're activating against. So making sure that search teams are able to locate those points in a huge search account which really helps surface the right insights so we can optimise to share of voice and the metrics, share of search that are really important. That's obviously evolved into a broader data sophistication project, so something that we are now doing in a post-COVID world, and I think arguably a bit of a silver lining, if there is one in COVID, is us enabling teams to really connect at the right conversations and the right data points. So the data sophistication project that we are now running with the Hilton team involves surfacing some of those both macro trends, so using things like Google Travel Analytics Center, the business data in terms of occupancy, RevPAR, and then also thinking about how do we connect that with some of the media data points around share of search and how we're pacing some of those campaigns, particularly within a search platform. So all of those 13 data points that we've now got in there are trended and they're indexed. And that means that teams can go into a simple dashboard, look at where a particular region or route is over or underperforming, and then that enables them to go into a search campaign and pinpoint, okay, is there an opportunity in there for us to actually push the bids, or there's more opportunity for us to spend, and then really combat some of those challenges that we often see from the OTAs against us.
Yeah, really trying to make the complex as kind of simple,
Exactly
easy to understand as possible. Surinder, I think when we were talking earlier about the pandemic and we're still recovering, the travel industry is still rebounding, I think it's fair to say. And as a result, it's pumped out a lot of aspirational kind of travel messaging. Coming home on the tube, you've got like, go to Ibiza and go here or go there. What are you doing now to connect with the audience? Is it that kind of aspirational message, or has it changed?
No, we're actually about to pivot and turn that on its head. We're about to sort of poke fun at some of the travel cliches and really start to talk about some of the travel tensions that exist, because I think that, in lockdown, we've all been fed up of this aspirational messaging that actually, even whether it's talent or whether it's how the ads are, where we put our media, it doesn't represent any of us actually, and it's very tiring. Now, I will say the challenge is very real in hospitality because we've got 18 brands. Marriott's got 30-something brands, Accor's got 40-something brands. So that sea of sameness and that challenge to differentiate is really tough. But as I said, we're going to launch a new marketing platform called Hilton for the Stay. And again, where hospitality today tends to do campaigns in silos that have specific KPIs where we run media and creative and report against those KPIs, we're going to have a marketing platform that all of our 18 brands will pull through for the stay. Our campaigns will become stories that are pulled through this one messaging sort of platform, so that we can talk consistently but move away, like I said, from these cliches and more talk about the travel tensions that we all recognise and we enjoy and we can have some fun with. I think about that connection as well. I mean, there's a lot I could say on this, but I'll keep it short. But we're, as a company with 7,000 hotels globally, we have obviously diverse team members, diverse owners, diverse customers, and we've got a vision that was set over 100 years ago that makes us primed for being best in class from a diversity and representation perspective. So what we've done this year is we've really started to see or think about how can we push our media, our creative, our insights harder to make sure they truly do allow us to gain learnings and to be best in class. So one example in media is we worked with Brand Advance earlier this year and we ran it in a campaign. We didn't have a testing framework. The results were so-so, and we really struggled to lift out any learnings from working with Brand Advance in that particular campaign and apply it to another campaign or another brand. We have since put a measurement framework together that makes us go, what's our hypothesis? What's our test? What's our control? Within that hypothesis, if this happens, then that action. If this happens, then that action. So coming back to diversity or coming back to representation, where we want to try, whether it's new networks, new creative, new partners, new formats, they might sit within a campaign or within a brand that has a leader that's got a budget and their own objectives. But from a media capabilities perspective, I am making sure that my team don't just report the weather in terms of the campaign, but they actually truly do test and we get learnings we can lift and apply to other brands or other moments.
That's really interesting. I think that ties together quite a few of the topics that were covered in the debate this morning. So diversity and inclusion across media, also measurement and the importance of having that to show the effectiveness of your campaign, which is all that we want to try and achieve, right, in media. So we're setting up a new marketing framework and all of this going forward, and trying to turn different conventions on their head. Charlotte, what are the considerations going into 2023 then for you and for the team at Merkle?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's making sure that we're supporting the Hilton team on the launch for this day, and that for us means there are a number of things. I think we're all very used to talking about the integration of creative and media, but I really think pulling that entire planning process apart and making sure that we're ingesting some of those media insights and learnings into some of the creative ideation processes. So we actually work very closely with Hilton's other agency, TBWA, in that process, and it's been a really, I think, fair to say, collaborative process, making sure that we're having some of those workshopping exercises very early on. So it's not just about having the right format for the right platform, it's about sharing some of those media insights to inform some of the creative idea. And just making sure you're aware, I suppose, of the perspectives that you have in the room. Surinder's obviously mentioned brand advance, but I think we try to be very conscious of precisely what perspective don't we have, and if that doesn't exist within a Merkle team or it doesn't exist within a Hilton team, where do we need to go to make sure that we are keeping our eyes open and our head up to have a truly inclusive approach, both in the way that we think, the way that we plan, but also the way that we activate.
And I think this will be our last question of the session, so I'll put it to each of you. But what one piece or one learning would you have you taken away from the last 2 years that you might want to share with the people in this room? Surinder?
My learning or my advice is, for me personally, I want to see equal measure of successes and failures. And actually, when that balance starts to skew, I start to get suspicious that A, we're feeding our own egos, or B, we're not testing. Of course, we want to scale our successes, not our failures, so that we can drive more revenue, get our business to be stronger than it was ever before. But from a testing perspective, I push my agency, I push my team to fail as often as they succeed.
I think for me, probably just around the fact that data for me can both be a driver, but it can also be a distraction. So I think very quickly understanding where you can surface the right data points, and often that is through just communication and making sure that you're connecting the right skill sets. And that includes going outside your own agency team.
Okay, I think I might have lied. I have a space for one more question. So the name of the session is called Combating Change with Courage. What does that mean to both of you?
To me, I mean, I'm going to sort of reinforce my answer in terms of to have courage, you've got to be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. You've got to leave egos at the door. You've got to be prepared to fail and fail often. And I also think this year, again, leaving the ego at the door, we have started to network, not just with Merkle, but started to network with a lot of advisory bodies and experts in the industry, and sometimes that is not-profit agent consultancies like Creative Equals for us, sometimes it's advisory groups like the WFA, but I would highly advise, I think there's so many experts out there. I think if you want to be a learn-it-all, I would really highly advise that consult outside of your bubble.
Okay. And Charlotte?
I think I'd probably say similar, to be honest. I think it's about just being really purposeful in the connections that you want to make. Ultimately, for me, courage comes from having confidence in what you're talking about or what you're seeking to learn. So I think having a really clear objective of what you want to achieve, but having some data to fall back on. And that might not be perfect, and that's okay, but I think having a clear starting point on, if I don't have it, where do I go to gather it? And that's often the approach I think we've had to take for some campaigns. So we this year we launched a TikTok campaign with Hilton, which was a really bold decision, I think, for you to make as a business. And a lot of that included around testing structures and thinking about, actually, we don't have a benchmark for this because we've not done it before. So how do we make sure that we're structuring that campaign and layering it from a media perspective in a way that will help us learn and gain maximum insight from it?
Very interesting. I think that's all we have time for. So thank you, Surinder. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.